Welcome to an hour of politics-free football talk. It's the Football Guys Daily Fantasy Power Grid presented by DraftKings, and this is week 9. We're going to go where we always go to start off the show, Vegas lines. John, tell us, what is Vegas leading us to believe this week?
Yeah, we've got probably a higher scoring week this week than last week. At the top of the list again, we've got Kansas City. Last week they went up against the Jets. We were a little worried about that game, and it went on to deliver. We did well with Kansas City. They scored 35 points this week. They're at the top of the Vegas value chart once again. This time with a 31.5 implied team total against the Carolina Panthers. We're going to talk about that offense. They've got an exciting person potentially coming back. Outside of that, it's the normal names, right? It's Seattle with 29, Houston with 28.5. Pittsburgh is right up there with 28. Minnesota goes up against Detroit, 28.3. And I think I counted before the show, there are 6 games with Vegas totals above 50. So those are going to be the ones that we're going to be looking at in terms of stacking. And this week, maybe if I behave myself during the show, maybe Austin, you'll come to me and ask for what my stacks are at the end. I don't know.
Maybe. We'll see. That was my bad last week, but you better be on your best behavior. All right. Let's talk about quarterbacks. Devin, I want to come to you first. Talk about some QBs. We've got a few injuries we're looking at here. We've got Gardner Minshew is out with a thumb injury. Andy Dalton is on the COVID list and is out. And then Matthew Stafford had a COVID close contact situation. He's not ruled out yet, but we're keeping an eye on him. It looks like he could go if he tests negative the rest of the week. Now, full disclosure, we're recording on Wednesday night this week, so our information is from that point in the week. So, Devin, let's talk quarterbacks. Who do you like?
We're going to talk about a lot of expensive players this week at other positions.
Aha.
So, I'm tempted to go with Jake Luton.
Gardner Minshew's replacement going up against Houston.
We're going to go with Luton against Houston. And look, this is just a matchup play. I mean, Houston has been largely terrible throughout the entire year. Aaron Rodgers tore them up in Week 7 for 283-4. Ryan Tannehill 366-4. Gardner Minshew, who Luton is replacing, 301-2. So I don't think the drop off between Minshew and this guy, he's a better passer than Minshew probably. He's 6'6". He's a big quarterback, but he's not going to run nearly as much as what Minshew has upside for. But I think at 4,900 on DraftKings, I mean, unless Stafford is out, and we could talk about that a little bit, but Chase Daniel I think would become interesting at 4,000 and probably the best play on the slate. But I'm starting, at least in cash, recording on Wednesday, going way down because I want to spend up at these other positions.
Yeah, this is a build choice and a man, this guy's dirt cheap kind of choice.
The other guy I like, I'm going back to Justin Herbert, yeah. 6,800 on DraftKings going up against Las Vegas. Look, I mean, Las Vegas looked good last week against Cleveland, but 1, Baker Mayfield is terrible, and 2, that wind in that game was just nasty. So I don't put any stock in changing my view of this Vegas team. Prior to last week, they allowed Tom Brady to have his best game of the year, and they've allowed 300-yard passers in three of their games this year. So I think Herbert at 6,800, he's a little priced up. I mean, that's a little bit of a concern, but I think that he's an excellent GPP play. And then if you want to go all the way up, I'm going Kyler Murray against Miami. I think that this is a big rushing potential. Cam ran for 80 yards in Week 1 against them, and they haven't really faced a mobile quarterback since then. So those are the 3 I'm looking at, but I'll turn it over to the other guys and let them talk a little bit about the guys I talked about or other guys.
Yeah, what do you think, Phil? Do you like those picks, or you got some other guys in mind?
So I agree with paying down at quarterback in cash games. I think GPPs is where I'm going to want to spend up on the higher price guys like your Wilsons and Mahomes and Murray's, and even Herbert's, like Devin mentioned, is up there this week. But I think Luton is probably taking it a bit too far. I've kind of been doing my research on Luton because it is an interesting matchup, like Devin said. And from what from what I've been reading, because I'm not some sort of college scout and I'm not going to pretend that I could grind film, but I trust a lot of guys out there who do. And I would say that Jake Luton's career arc is going to fall somewhere like in between Tom Savage, which is out of the league in 3 years. That's like the low bar. And maybe he could get up to like Kyle Allen, where he's not good, but he's good enough to keep some wide receivers and running backs afloat. So I think that's what you're hoping for at his price. I want to talk about. All right, so what I would do in cash games instead of Luton, I would just spend.
You would play Jonathan Taylor.
What if I could? But I would spend 800 more for Derek Carr. I think that we could throw out last week's game against Cleveland that was ruined by the weather. Vegas opened that game with a close spread, 3 points. They have it high scoring. Vegas has a solid 26-point total, and how are they going to get there against the Chargers? LA has allowed the 6th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks in the league. And the last time we saw them, Drew Lock was staging a miraculous second half comeback. So I think Derek Carr could easily, score the 20 or so points that he needs for cash games and still leave you with enough room to put together a decent lineup. And then switching over real quick to GPP play, besides the expensive guys that I mentioned, I think that the price and projected roster percentage that I'm seeing on Lamar Jackson has kind of hit a tipping point where I want to play him. He's just below 7K on DraftKings, and he's basically a coin flip to get you 25 to 28 points. And, that is definitely going to be something like 10 times his implied roster percentage. So I think from a game theory perspective, he's a good play, and you could stack him cheaply enough with Mark Andrews, or you got Hollywood Brown with a squeaky wheel narrative this week.
Right.
So I'll turn it over to the boys.
Hey, John, we mentioned quarterbacks on both sides of that Raiders-Chargers game. Do you like either of those guys? Or are you looking to a different game, like maybe this high-scoring Seattle-Buffalo game?
Well, I mean, I think that the Herbert and Carr are definitely in play. For me, they're likely going to be GPP plays. However, I really do like Herbert this week as a tournament play. But in cash games, the Luton, is that what we're going to say his name? Is that how we pronounce his name? Luton or Luton? I like Luton.
You like the French.
You're going to make him French. You make everybody French.
Yeah, I do. However the heck you pronounce his name, it's intriguing to me, but I don't know that I'm going to pull the trigger. I'm going to see, as we're recording the show here, I'm going to see if I can build a cash game lineup without him that I like, and maybe I'll report back on that. But the guys that are currently on my list for cash, in terms of my prep, they're about 7K on DraftKings. That's where I really believe that you're safe this week. Those two names are Deshaun Jackson and Josh Allen.
Watson.
What did I say?
Jackson.
Oh, sorry.
He can throw the ball, but I don't think he's the guy you want to start a quarterback.
Obviously, Deshaun Watson. I'm looking at a list of names, and apparently got things transposed. Deshaun Watson and Josh Allen are the two guys on my list. Watson goes up against Jacksonville. Jacksonville has been diced by opposing quarterbacks over pretty much the whole season. Last week, the Air Bear went 350, 3 touchdowns, and even rushed one. And oh, by the way, Deshaun Watson likes to rush the ball. I think he has 5 or more carries in all but one game this year, if I'm not mistaken. And he hasn't scored on a rushing on a rush since week 1. So could be some regression coming in that way. Josh Allen's the other one going up against Seattle. We know that's probably going to be a shootout. So why not go that way? That's where I want to go. I'm a little worried about spending down. Luton, the numbers are there. It makes sense. And I'm always the guy on the show saying don't spend a lot of money at quarterback if you can avoid it in cash games. So I feel hypocritical saying no.
What about Chase Daniel at 4K?
Yeah.
That like 900 more. That's where you get to just like you have to.
That's
I think
almost
you kind of
a
have to.
free square, right?
Yeah, I feel like you have to in that situation.
He's guaranteed. He's almost guaranteed for 250 and 2. Like that's Chase Daniel every game.
Plus, he has more experience than Luton, of course. I mean,
yeah, I don't hate that. That makes me a little more comfortable in the sense that, you know, he's a guy going up against a defense too that we know is acceptable to the pass. So that's if that ends up happening, you know, and again, we're recording even earlier this week, but if that happens, I think you can go that way. As far as GPPs, you guys mentioned a lot of the folks on my list: Mahomes, Kyler Murray, Air Bear. And then the one that you didn't mention, is Drew Lock going up against Atlanta, 5,200. Atlanta's been pretty tough against the run, actually. We saw a few weeks ago they shut down Alexander Madison in a game that I myself thought he was going to blow up. They've had kind of a pass funnel defense, if you will. And so Lock, at 5,200 in a game where, potentially, we know Denver doesn't like to shoot out, but they may be forced to if Atlanta puts up a lot of points. And I think that they probably could at home. It's an interesting play at 5,200.
I dig it. Devin, you got any other QBs you wanted to mention here?
No, I think we covered it.
Yeah, that was a pretty good round. What do you think, Phil? Anybody?
I got just 2 quick points to make on some things that we've already covered. In GPPs, I'm going to be fading Deshaun Watson, even though I think he's generally a good play. Besides the roster percentage, which I think is going to lead all quarterbacks, I think we have to account for the possibility that Jake Luton is actually awful. And if that happens, we might see a game script where Watson isn't required to throw the ball all that much. And then you're looking at, something like the Houston defense and David Johnson maybe as a pivot. And then just really quick, I have a feeling Matthew Stafford is going to be fine to play in this game. And I think that this COVID thing is going to bump him down. And like John said, it's a matchup where the defense is extra susceptible to the pass. The Vikings have allowed 300 yards, multiple touchdown passes are both in every game but one this season. And in that game, Phillip Rivers only threw the ball 25 times.
Those are good insights. We're going to be keeping an eye on those situations as the week goes on. Be sure to check out these guys' articles that they post over at footballguys.com, where on Friday and Saturday, they'll give you their sort of updated and sort of later in the week picks based on the injury information we get. Let's talk about some running backs. Phil, I'm going to come to you first. We've got a couple of mentions here. It looks like Christian McCaffrey could be back this week after missing 6 games. Not totally sure on that. Keep an eye on his situation. And then the Miami backfield is banged up. We've got Myles Gaskin, who's out with a knee injury. And then Matt Breida didn't practice on Wednesday. He's got a hamstring injury. So that's probably Jordan Howard next man up in the Miami backfield. And those are the big ones.
And Jonathan Taylor is like dead to everyone.
And Jonathan Taylor got a limited practice Wednesday, ankle injury. Jordan Wilkins has a groin injury. Like that whole Colts backfield is a bit of a mess as well. So, and then, they're splitting time even when they're healthy, it seems like. So, Phil, tell us, running backs.
Right. So just in case some viewers out there might have sat out last week, Dalvin Cook scored 51.6 DraftKings points against Green Bay, and he's now up against the Lions, who have allowed 46% more fantasy points to running backs than league average over the last 5 weeks. I think if you're playing cash games and you're not playing Dalvin Cook, you might have to re-examine your process. And it makes it especially easy this week with no Alvin Kamara on the main slate. You got Derrick Henry up against the Bears. You got Ezekiel Elliott has just been destroyed by poor quarterback play. So in cash games, I think that's kind of like an auto click. And then in tournaments, I'm kind of interested to get the guys' takes on some of these guys that I'm going to throw out there for a number of reasons. but I'm still kind of working through what I want to do at running back. A name that jumped out to me was DeAndre Swift. And I was kind of surprised as I started looking through some of the early roster percentages that I'm seeing around the industry. I was kind of shocked to see that he was coming in much higher than I had anticipated. I thought it would be kind of a sneaky play. Maybe it had something to do with the Stafford news where people thought they were the Lions might go more run heavy. But my thinking was that he's going to get a bigger piece of the pie with Galladay out in the passing game. We've seen him more involved since the bye week. He was up to a 62% snap share last week. And, I was kind of thinking that people wanted to play Marvin Jones with no Galladay. They might want to play Hockenson with no Galladay. And I saw Swift as a leverage play, but that's going to depend on where his roster percentage shakes out. And then real quick, I like Derrick Henry for tournaments. I think I'll kind of look past the rough matchup against Chicago. And anytime that I could get a guy with Derrick Henry ceiling at 10%-ish roster rates, I will look to double or even triple the field. And between the tackles, runners have kind of been doing pretty good, at least on a per carry basis against the Bears. So I'm not too scared off by the matchup. I think they've been a little lucky in the touchdown department. So give me Derrick Henry in tournaments. And the one that I really want to throw out there and see what the guys think is Chase Edmonds. He's 6,800 on DraftKings. I feel like the entire industry has been just chomping at the bit to use this guy. All respect due to Kenyon Drake, but I feel like most of the fantasy community were kind of glad that he sprained his ankle, and we get to see we get to see Chase Edmonds in action. So I'm wondering, the Dolphins. I know Devin's going to throw up some red black-eyed Joes at this one. They have the 32nd ranked rush defense according to DVOA, and they just do.
They haven't allowed a running back to go for over 80 yards. That doesn't make any sense.
I'm just telling you what the statistic says. So is it going to be shiny new toy syndrome with Chase Edmonds that's going to make him a sketchy play in tournaments, or is this
I think he's going to be popular?
So, or is it like the blow up spot that everybody hopes it's going to be?
John, tell me your thoughts on some running backs here.
Yeah, I'll continue on that train of thought. So Edmonds is listed on my GPP list at the moment. I will be honest and say I haven't seen any percent rostered projections at this point in the week. I think, as my model is showing me right now, he's probably a good play up to about 15%. If he goes above that, then he probably becomes a fade candidate based on his salary and projected points. I just looked up. I had the same stat as you, Phil. 32nd DVOA against the run and third against the pass, which really kind of argues that they're going to attack this defense at their weakness. And then I looked up on our site the defense, what they're allowing, and Miami's allowed the 7th most points to opposing running backs. So while they may not have been beaten by yardage, they're definitely giving up points to opposing running backs because they're 7th most allowed to this point in the season. So I like to call when I'm done talking, we'll let Devin tell us all the reasons that we're wrong. But I'm okay with it again up to about that 15% threshold. If he starts approaching 20, then I'm going to be underweight on him. In terms of cash games, I agree with you, Phil. I think Dalvin Cook is probably the class of the position. At 8,200, though, he's going to be tough to fit in. It's really just an opportunity cost question that you'll have to ask yourself as you're building out those rosters. I think it can be done, though, based on what I'm doing in real time during the show. I think that the person who I think has the most value on the slate or at the running back position on the slate is Josh Jacobs. He's an excellent play, in my opinion, at 6,300 going up against the Chargers. Didn't do a whole lot last week, in fairness, but I still think that bouncing back this week, he appears to be a guy that I want a piece of. I do like the DeAndre Swift call for cash games, and I think you can also make an argument for David Johnson this week against Jacksonville at 5,600. For GPPs, I will probably stop after talking about, who should I talk about? Matt Breida at the low end, 4,000. Myles Gaskin is trending towards not playing again early in the week. $4,000. I kind of like saving that salary at $4,000. He could end up being borderline cash viable if you wanted to go there. I don't think you have to, but if you needed to, it's not a terrible play because we've seen what he can do in San Francisco in the past. I guess the question really is, what is Tua bringing to that offense? Last week, he wasn't really asked to do a whole lot. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does bring when the pressure's on and he needs to throw the ball more than 20 times a game.
Yeah, and we're keeping an eye on Matt Breida and whether he will, practice later in the week. He did miss practice on Wednesday, so that could make things interesting. To your point about the Miami Dolphins defense, some of the running back numbers are a little inflated by touchdowns that they've allowed to running backs as opposed to sort of yardage performance. So looking purely at fantasy points, that's skewing a little bit. If I look at my normalized strength of schedule tool, they're second worst over the last 5 weeks. But if you dig into the numbers a little bit, it looks pretty touchdown heavy. So I don't know that they're really as bad as sort of the fantasy points tell the tale. Devin, tell me about the running backs.
Yeah, I mean, 32nd is crazy. I would have them 23rd or 24th, but
Yeah,
Houston is allowing 160 yards rushing a game. Like, there's a big difference between that defense and Miami's defense. I don't want to get too much into it, but that's a bit ridiculous. Anyway, so as Roy Jones Jr. said back in like 2005, y'all must have forgot. And we're going to go with Antonio Gibson as a GPP play against the Giants. I think he's coming off a bye week. He's coming off his best week of the year, 121 yards. Against the Giants, I think he's in an excellent spot. He's going to go underlooked at 5,800. That's my GPP play of the day. Cash games, figure out a way to play Dalvin Cook. The matchup is too good against Detroit. I do like Josh Jacobs. The third guy I would have, and I have all the salary because I'm either going Luton or Daniel, is I'd go James Robinson. I just talked about 160 yards rushing for Houston. I think they're the worst defense rush against the run in the league, and this is a big opportunity for Robinson. Going down the list a little bit, a name that hasn't been said, I like him a little bit more than Swift, is Justin Jackson.
Justin Jackson, yeah.
Josh Jackson, I don't know why, but I think Justin Jackson looked really good last week. 17 carries, finally starting to win that role, going up against a Raiders team that, they're not the best defense, they're not the worst defense, but if I can get 15 plus carries, I think that's higher upside, at least higher floor in cash than Swift has for sure. I think the problem with Swift is he could very easily only have 8 to 10 touches.
What do you think about, because I like the Jackson call too, but when I put a little star beside it because I'm a little afraid of what they're going to do. Are they going to put, Troy Maine Pope into the Josh Kelly role and, end up splitting that backfield? Or do you think that they're going to let Jackson kind of get the bulk of the touches there? Because last week what we saw was kind of that switch where Kelly really was kind of on the sideline, but then Pope had 10 rushes and 7 targets. And if that happens, that does pull back, I think, a little bit of Justin Jackson's upside.
Yeah, so Pope is in the concussion protocol as of Wednesday, so keep an eye on that. Okay. It's a fair point. He did have 5 receptions, 10 carries, but Jackson still had three receptions out of the backfield. I think there's upside there, especially at the price. And then one last guy I'll throw out there is James Conner. I don't know that we brought him up, but great offensive line in Pittsburgh. Matt Batanti has them as a top 5 offensive line. And they're going up against a Dallas defense this Dallas defense is absolutely falling apart. Leighton Vander Esch is terrible at the middle linebacker. He was a great weak side linebacker the past couple years, but he slid over to the middle role and he really hasn't been strong at all.
And it doesn't help that Dallas is maybe starting a water boy at quarterback, so they.
But I think that's largely an excuse, right? So they were horrible before that.
Yeah.
You look at the last 3 weeks, 164-2 to Kenyon Drake, who had struggled mightily before that. Washington ran for close to 200 yards, and Boston Scott had his best day of his career. Like, these are 3 running backs, Washington, Philadelphia, and Arizona, that are not on the caliber of James Conner and the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think that this is a big game for James Conner.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. Any other running backs you guys want to mention?
What do we do with Christian McCaffrey?
Pass.
Yeah, if it's his first game back, it may not be a full workload. Is that what we're thinking?
How do you fit him in? Like,
it all boils down. It always boils down to percent rostered number for me. I've got him probably again in that 15% threshold to reach GPP value at 8,500, which kind of bumps him up a little bit. I don't know. I mean, if he's single digit, then you got to go overweight on him. Just because you know what he brings to the table, and you know that Kansas City's going to put up points, right? I mean, Kansas City's going to put up 30 points. So if they need, near the end of the game, they start dumping off passes. This guy literally in that fourth quarter could catch 5 passes, and we know what he can do after he catches the ball. It's an interesting question, Phil. I think my gut says on Wednesday evening that he's going to go overlooked because people are going to want to see him play a game. And if that happens, I'm going to be overweight on him.
Yep. And Dalvin Cook's going to be 25% plus.
And that's a good point, Devin. If Dalvin Cook, you can have him. He's a known quantity at this point. Coming off of that 50-point performance, he's $300 less. People are going to be like, well, I'll save the $300. I'll go with the known quantity in a decent matchup, no less, rather than going with CMC. But we know that CMC brings as much upside to the table. And I know, Phil, you wanted to say something, so go ahead.
No, just that I agree with your take. I think he's probably going to be a pretty good leverage play in tournaments.
Let me ask this. If both Myles Gaskin and Matt Breida are out for the Dolphins, do you have interest in Jordan Howard at 4,000 on DraftKings?
No.
I'm just making sure.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay,
no. Frank Gore.
Yeah, dude, what about Frank Gore? Your boy Frank Gore, what happened?
Yeah, I think Frank Gore is in a spot where, what's his price?
I'm looking.
Like free?
Too much.
Free square.
4K? Is he even on this slate? I don't even think he's on this slate.
Oh,
I don't have him on my list.
I don't think he's on the main slate.
He may not be on the slate. Yeah. Okay, so.
The Jets have a primetime game? Interesting.
they have to have at least one a year. Yeah, he's
Jets
on Monday Night Football then.
Jets and Patriots, Monday Night Football. Oh, boy. Showdowns. Frank Gore. Patriots are missing 6 of their top 7 front 7 from last year, and you look at their game logs, and the way to beat them is run the football.
Frank Gore in your captain spot in the showdown. 2
touchdowns, guaranteed. If not, at Tip and Pick on Twitter.
Exactly. Please use the YouTube comments to ask us extra questions that come out later in the week so we can help you out. And please give us a thumbs up on this video. Let's talk about wide receivers. John, I will come to you first. There are a couple of injuries we're looking at here. We got Kenny Golladay is out with a hip injury, and Calvin Ridley seems unlikely to go this week. He did not practice Wednesday, and then T.Y. Hilton is dealing with a groin injury, also did not practice on Wednesday. Who you got at receiver?
Yeah, I mean, I got a handful of guys at the cash game for cash games, and I'll maybe run through them and then hand off to the other guys and see what they, where they think I missed or add in, and then we can talk about GPPs on the back end. But Calvin Ridley, what's going to happen with him this week? Is he playing? Is he not playing? Do we know for sure yet?
It seems unlikely.
Yeah.
That's what Gene Bramall was saying. Dr. Gene Bramall does our injury reports over at footballguys.com. Keep an eye on what he says. But early in the week, he's saying, it seems like probably not. Foot injury.
Yeah. And that's what I had read on Monday. And if that happens, I think Julio Jones becomes a really interesting play at 7,200. He's probably, just think about the volume, the implied volume that he's going to get without Calvin Ridley on the field. I think that Julio could be a really strong play in both cash games and GPP formats. I like him quite a bit. In that same price point, Keenan Allen continues to get double-digit targets just about every week. And so he makes a lot of sense, especially on DraftKings where you're getting that full point per reception. I think, you can make an argument to get away from guys like that over at FanDuel where it's more touchdown heavy. But on DraftKings, the floor is just so solidified by guys who are getting so many targets every week. Just below that, I've got Tyler Lockett. He's an incredible play, and he comes in almost $1,000 discount from DK Metcalf right now, which to me is kind of crazy, especially when you think about the coverage situation that they're going to see. I'm not sure that Tre'Davious White can shut down DK Metcalf. In fact, I'm not sure anybody can at this point. But we do know the path of least resistance is going through the slot position against that Buffalo secondary. And so from my perspective, I think Tyler Lockett's the better play, at least for cash games in that situation. And then, I got three other names, but I don't want to filibuster. So I'll just say the names. I think Terry McLaurin is a decent cash game play. DJ Moore came up high as he seems to do every week for me. And then if you need to punt the position, because we're talking about a lot of expensive players, without Kenny Golladay, how are the Lions going to move the ball through the air? Certainly, Marvin Jones is going to be probably their wide receiver one, or will be their wide receiver one. But could you get 4 or 5 catches out of Danny Amendola? Because if you could, he reaches 3x value that you need, and then you can spend up on some of the other guys that I've talked about.
The name is Quintez Cephas.
That's
3K.
That's the play.
Without Golladay, he had 13 targets in his 2 games.
He definitely did. I played him probably more than I should have, because I think the second game he laid an egg or pretty close to it, if I'm not mistaken.
He had 10 targets in his first game. He had 3 catches in both of his games. But at 3K, if he can have 3 or 4 catches, keep an eye on the news. Like if he's gonna play, he's interesting.
Now, what happened there? I mean, in last week's game when Golladay went out, Cephas didn't see the field. He had 0 snaps. But Marvin Hall got a lot of action.
Cephas was a healthy scratch.
Okay.
It was probably like a special teams thing.
Decision.
And I think it also, let's be clear that this will also be very contingent on the quarterback that's playing. I don't think I would play a Lions receiver in cash if Chase Daniel. We talked about Chase Daniel already. Say again?
You don't need to at 4K. If you're going 4K at a quarterback, you don't need to go Amendola. Right. I'd go Amendola. I think that Daniel would target Amendola the most, but you don't need to go that low.
Just don't double up on the Lions. If you go Chase Daniel, don't get another Lion in your cash game lineups. That's too much for me. I just feel like you're asking for the house of cards to crumble at that rate.
That's a fair point. Devin, who else you got?
Yeah, I mean, Keenan Allen's the just plug-and-play guy. I think it's pretty easy this week. What are we doing about Pittsburgh? Like, I want to play every Steeler. And that's the problem. I mean, Deontay Johnson can't stay healthy. And but at 55,000, it's $100 cheaper than Marvin Jones. Yeah, I'm in.
For cash, you're in for cash?
I think so. Depending on the build, right? So if I go Chase Daniel, and then if Daniel's playing, and then I go 5K receiver, I can load up on a lot of different positions. I
think I'd rather go James Conner if I'm playing a Steeler.
Play them both. They're going to score 40 points. Everyone does against Dallas.
Yeah.
There's plenty to go around in Dallas that you could play two players in Pittsburgh in cash.
All right. Who else you got?
I think Allen Robinson against Tennessee is pretty interesting. I think he doesn't necessarily have the highest ceiling, but you look at this Titans secondary, and they are just atrocious. Adoree Jackson's still out. They traded... Who do they trade for? Some washed-up corner. They traded a 6th-round pick for him. We're not even going to mention that. But, I mean, Robinson's the guy in Chicago. I think Stephon Diggs is probably interesting against Seattle, 7,400. But, looking at this year's a bit weird in that there's not a ton of just lock and load cash game plays at wide receiver. It seems like there's a lot of boom or bust type players, but Allen, Diggs, I can get behind McLaurin. DJ Moore, it continues to be safe and continues to go under the radar. And then going down with a Deontay Johnson or a Lions player, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, we've got Green Bay on the Thursday night game, so no Devonta Adams. We've got Michael Thomas, who's been injured like the whole year. If you wanted to try a Tampa Bay receiver, they're also not on the main slate. They're Sunday Night Football. So some of those guys you might think are a little safer in that high price range, you really don't have as options here. I mean, it's more like, hey, Julio Jones and
it's
Seattle
like the Ridleys,
receiver.
Julio Jones, Christian Kirk's, like, ugh.
They've just done a much better job this year. I really believe this. DraftKings has done a splendid job of pricing players this year. There haven't been a lot of weeks outside of injury situations, but they continue to price people appropriately. And so, as you said, those lock and load guys we talked about in years past, Devin, they're really not there this year, which I think has made for a better game, a more enjoyable DFS experience at that site compared to the other big site that we talk about as well.
Well, I think it also gives sharper players an advantage when the pricing is good and there isn't like a ton of obvious plays to throw in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Let's see. Phil, receivers.
Sure. So most of these guys have already been mentioned. So I'll just go quick. Julio Jones, definitely my top pick for cash games. And I think I'm going to at least match the field on him in tournaments, even though I expect him to be heavily rostered. John mentioned the volume in weeks 15 through 17 last year. The last time that Calvin Ridley was out, Jones was targeted 20, 15, and 13 times, respectively. So I think that's the type of volume that he's in for this week. And to make matters worse for the Broncos, A.J. Boye, their top cornerback, had just came back last week, left in the fourth quarter with a concussion. He's back in the protocol. That would leave the task of covering Julio Jones to a third-round rookie, Michael Ojemudia. Good luck, Michael. And then we've got Terry McLaurin that the guys mentioned. I think he's about $500 too cheap. So that ground has been covered. I think maybe you could go to Jerry Jeudy in cash games if Tim Patrick is out again. But Patrick was back at practice, so that's something that you got to keep an eye on. And then in tournaments, I think you're going to want to come up with at least a short fade of Dalvin Cook because he's going to be super chalky. And I think one way to leverage his popularity is the Minnesota passing game. I think that Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson, these guys each have proven, established 30-point ceilings. Either one of them could go off in any given week. And then we talked a little bit about Pittsburgh, but nobody mentioned Chase Claypool. And I think that Claypool more closely fits the profile of wide receiver who's really been getting over on the Dallas secondary. So I could definitely picture a big play, and then they get cute with him and they try to give him rushing touchdowns sometimes, and you never know what's going to happen with Claypool. Last one in GPPs for me, DJ Chark. So we've talked about Luton.
DJ Chark. DJ Chark. Sorry, it's been a few weeks. I need to get that out of my system. Okay, continue.
You got it. So the one thing about Luton that the scouts kept pointing to is that he's got a big arm. He could fit it in tight windows, and he throws a pretty good deep ball. So this is kind of like my own little narrative that I think I'm probably going to be the only one spouting, but we've seen rookie quarterbacks come in before and kind of just pepper the alpha receiver because they're scared of getting yelled at in the huddle. And Chark has kind of already called out his quarterback this season in Minshew. So I think Luton might be walking into this as saying, that's the guy that I am not going to get aggravated and I'm just going to throw his way all afternoon. So I think there's a chance the volume could be there for Chark in a good matchup against Houston, and hopefully Luton gives you something.
John, any other guys you want to mention?
Yeah, I wanted to return to two points. So the guys I want to mention are the Minnesota wide receivers. I think both of them are similarly valued in terms of my model. For me, it's going to come down to percent rostered, as it always does. Whoever is going to be on less rosters, that's the person that you'll see me with more of in my mass multi-entry. I think they're decent plays this week because Dalvin Cook is going to be so heavily rostered, and they just represent a good leverage off of him in the sense that if he doesn't deliver, and you expect Minnesota, I've got them as the 4th highest scoring team on the slate. If Cook has a bad day, then that by virtue is going to mean that Thielen or Justin Jefferson will have a big day. In terms of ranking, I've got Thielen right here, and then just below him, Justin Jefferson. But I think they're almost interchangeable. I'll come back to that Pittsburgh game though, because what I'm afraid of with some of we've talked about a couple of those receivers. I heard Claypool, Deontay Johnson was also on my list, and I know that Devin mentioned him. But be careful there. The thing I really worry about is Dallas. I mean, at this rate, one of the 4 of us we could be the quarterback for that team by the end of the season. I don't know that they can sustain drives to the extent that they can even keep that game close. And if that's the case, Roethlisberger might just be handing the ball off to Connor for the entire second half. And those receivers that we've mentioned aren't so cheap. I mean, they're in the $5,000 to $6,000 range. They're not so cheap that if they don't get 8 catches and a couple touchdowns, they're not great GPP plays. So I'm not saying they're bad plays, but I would be careful of being overextended on them because I just don't see. I mean, Dallas is talking about putting in. Who the hell are they putting in now? I don't even know at this point. It's not Ben DiNucci at this.
Cooper Rush.
Yeah, it's Cooper Rush. I was trying to. I knew Kellen Moore wasn't right because Devin made a joke on base camp earlier, and that was
Vinny
in my
Testaverde.
mind. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I just don't see them scoring a lot of points in this game. And we saw last week, I think they ran 44 plays or something in that game. The last 2 opponents to face the Cowboys, I know Devin was being ironic or he was exaggerating, saying that everybody scores 40 points against the Cowboys. The last 2 weeks, they've given up 25 and 23 points. And that's not because of the strength of their defense. It's just because the game got out of hand and there was no reason to score any more points. So, I don't think that the Steelers are bad play, but just be careful on how much you go in that direction.
And real quick, that's why I like Claypool the best out of them, because I feel like he could get most of the way there in one play. And I think he's probably going to go 5% or less than 5% in GPPs.
I think that's fair.
Yeah,
I think Cooper Rush is better than Ben DiNucci, whoever the hell that is.
Agree.
It can't be any worse. Like,
and that's why they made the switch.
What's interesting is they've had. No, I'm not going to say that. Go ahead.
Please hit subscribe, hit the little bell so you get notifications. Thanks for that. Let's go to tight ends. Devin, I'll come to you first to talk about tight ends. No significant injuries here that I had on my list. Tell us who you like at tight end this week. It seems like it's the same sort of group of guys every week that we're sort of rolling through at this position, but there's very little safety at this position that it seems like. So tell us, what do you got?
Travis Kelce.
Yeah.
I mean, I've already talked about my cash game strategy, which is spend way down, and then I have money to, if I go Luton and Cephas, I have all the money. So, I mean, realistically, I'm half joking, but it's not really a concern. I mean, Darren Waller would be the other guy, but why?
I would go Waller and avoid the combination. If I'm going to tell you right now, I know it's Wednesday. There is no way in hell that you're going to end up with Luton and Cephas in your cash game lineup. So
I will have Luton or Daniel. I guarantee it.
I believe, but Cephas is not going to be there.
Because there'll probably be some other value that opens up between now and later in the week that you won't be forced to make that kind of a play. Is that what you're saying, John?
Or because I have more respect for Devin. I don't think he's that brain dead. He's not gonna put Cephas into his cash game lineups. I just don't believe that.
No, but if I go Justin Jackson, a 4,900 running back, and I go a $4,900 quarterback, I can easily afford a $7,200 receiver or $7,200 tight end.
Tight end, yeah.
Very easily.
Look, I said I'd come back to this later in the show. I guess now's as good of a time as any. I did build a cash game lineup as we've been talking about. Who are the must plays? Let's make sure I got them. Who are they? I think
Dalvin Cook and Keenan Allen are the only two.
Yeah, and I got both of those guys in my lineup, and I didn't go cheap at quarterback on this particular one because I'm not so sure that I'm into the Luton thing yet, although I may get there by the end of the week.
Did you get Josh Jacobs in that lineup too?
I got Josh Jacobs in that lineup. I got Deshaun Watson in that lineup.
Okay.
Where I took chances were at defense, which I always do. Right?
Yeah.
I've got your team, Austin. I got the Falcons there going up against Drew Lock. Where I took chances were with Breida and Danny Amendola. And Breida, we've talked about. If he comes out of concussion protocol, we should have the bulk of the carries there at $4,000 in a fast-paced game. I think that's not a terrible. And then we talked about Amendola already. But that gives me Allen, Lockett. Oh, the other one. And that's why I wanted to talk about it. Hayden Hurst, 4,100. It doesn't get you to Waller, who I like more, Devin. But I think I'm okay with Hayden Hurst, especially if and it sounds like Calvin Ridley's not going to play. That should mean additional targets for him at 4,100.
Yeah, and just to be clear, Breida isn't a concussion thing; it's a hamstring thing. But he's still could go either way there. Phil, talk about tight ends.
Yeah, Hayden Hurst was my guy for cash games with the way that I was building. So I agree with John. He's gone from being very hard to trust to being a very consistent high floor player over the last few weeks. And that floor should only increase with more targets in the absence of Ridley. The other guy that I've got on my list that I wouldn't mind spending down in cash games for is Noah Fant. He's got 16 targets over his last two games since getting back from an ankle injury. Locke just missed him on a deep shot last week, or his game could have been much better. Atlanta is the team that we've been targeting for opposing tight ends all season. Even my boy Ian Thomas had 3 catches against them last week, and that's hard to do.
Yeah.
So on the season, they've allowed now 48% more DraftKings points than league average. That's a lot more. So Noah Fant's in a pretty good spot. And if Tim Patrick sits again, a potentially great spot where he could see double-digit targets. And then in tournaments, I had mentioned earlier that I like the idea of Lamar Jackson at his price and roster percentage. And I feel the same way about Mark Andrews. He's at a season low price, 4,800. And he's just going to be low rostered, high upside. I think that's what you want to do in tournaments. Really not much more to add, except that could be a sneaky high scoring game there against the Colts. Some of their games do tend to shoot out.
Any other tight ends we want to mention, fellas? It seems like we did.
Jonnu Smith at 3,900 is interesting.
He kind of let people down. What was it, last week, right?
He did, and he's kind of let people down in the last couple of weeks. But if you look at Chicago, their secondary is pretty darn good, and the way to beat them has been the tight end. So Jared Cook had 51-1 last week. Johnny Munt and Gerald Everett had a combined 75 yards. Cameron Brate, Rob Gronkowski had a big game. Ian Thomas had 1 catch, which is typical. And then Evan Ingram tore him up. So I think that the linebackers are suspect for the Bears, and this could be a game where Jonnu has a big one. It's
a lot of faith, I feel like, because he started hot early in the season and he's got 3 cold games. It could be a great time to come back to him in GPPs because he's got that potential.
I was just going to say, I think he's been playing hurt. He hurt his ankle and he came back really quickly from it. And I think he's just kind of been gutting it out, but I'm not sure if he's himself. It's a couple weeks since the injury now, so hopefully it's worked itself out. But I agree. I'll probably be over the field on Jonnu Smith. And
to be fair, Travis Kelce is an even better play on FanDuel just because of I always pay up at tight end on that.
I think that's a good thing to talk about, Devin, is the value of paying up at tight end on that site.
their floor is much closer. So what they do is they'll have like one tight end at 7,500 or 8K in this range, but then they'll have everyone between like 6,500 and 5,500. And the difference between going down to 5,500 is not worth the salary. So typically I'll either go all the way up or I'll go in that second tier, the top guy in that second tier.
Yeah, I love the way DK stretches out the tight end pricing because it entices you to take that long shot dart at a guy. Oh, maybe he'll catch a touchdown, and go down at tight end. But on FanDuel, it's just not worth it. What were you going to say, John? Sorry.
All that I was going to say is that, because of the way that the scoring systems are so different on FanDuel, you have to play tight ends that can score touchdowns, and and not randomly, right? Not like a guy like Anthony Ferkser, for example. That's just never going to happen in terms of being positive EV over the long term. On DK, you can get away with that because a lot of times you're just looking for somebody. Anthony Ferkser, if you're playing him, it's because he's $200 or $2,500, and you're just hoping for 4 catches and 40 yards, and the opportunity cost is so low. But on FanDuel, as Devin's saying, you want those guys who can get in the end zone. So you're looking for Kelce, you're looking for Waller, you're looking for maybe a Hunter Henry or somebody like that. So, and it's a good way to diversify. If you're a person who plays on both sites, get yourself a lot of Kelce over at FanDuel, and then maybe take somebody else on DraftKings and kind of mitigate some of that risk and diversify yourself.
Yeah, that's good advice. Let's move on to defenses. Devin, do you have a low-cost defense that's going to help you get some of these high-priced plays in, or what do you got at defense?
Atlanta Falcons against Denver.
That's who John mentioned earlier as well.
If I'm spending up, it's going to be – I can't believe I'm saying this team. It's Washington against Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones is just awful. I mean, his decision-making is the worst in the league, the worst I've maybe ever seen.
Worse than Baker Mayfield?
Yes.
Oh.
Okay.
Well, yes. He's on my list of 2 quarterbacks. They're both in New York, and that are worse than Baker Mayfield. So.
Nice. John, you like that Falcons pick as well. Is there any other defense you have your eye on there?
Yeah, I mean, I like the Falcons call. That's the one that I called out earlier. I think the Cardinals against Tua are interesting. That's a play that I think I could get behind. If we see Matt Stafford sit on Sunday, I like the Vikings quite a bit at 2,400. That's one that I could see being, it may not be sneaky if that were to happen. And then, as much as we've talked up this Luton character, the Texans, I think, are a decent play against Jacksonville at 3,100. Those are the guys that I have on my list.
Yeah. Phil, defense?
Yeah, Washington and Arizona were my 2 for cash games. So GPPs, I think if we're throwing darts, I kind of like the Seahawks. They're getting Jamal Adams back this week, and I know that they were still a bad defense with Jamal Adams earlier this year, but it certainly can't hurt getting him back. And Josh Allen has not been playing well, and I especially don't trust Josh Allen in a big spot with playoff atmosphere. And I think that's kind of what people are expecting from this game. I just see a big play from Seattle's defense coming. That's more of a gut thing than anything statistical. So take that for what it's worth. And then the other one that I think I would look at is the Jaguars, because I think that there's a certain story that I could tell myself where Houston is probably the worst or one of the worst teams against running backs in the league. So if Robinson makes it so that Luton only has to not lose, and the Jaguars are kind of
stretching here, buddy.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And if there's Devin, 40-mile-an-hour winds and there's a hurricane, and if the power goes out, and if 3 quarterbacks get COVID, and
he definitely was about to make a thin argument. You can see where that was going.
All right, so maybe I was stretching a bit, but here's where I'm not. I always want a piece of the defense playing against Deshaun Watson. As good as he is, he holds onto the ball for too long, and he takes sacks. Sacks turn into turnovers eventually. So I wouldn't rule out the Jaguars for a big play on defense.
I'm surprised we didn't say Baltimore against Indy. Like that secondary, there's a path there where Lamar Jackson is good, and Phillip Rivers has to throw a lot against this secondary. We talked about Jonathan Taylor. We talked about Wilkins being hurt.
Yeah.
So that leaves them with Nyheim Hines, who could be interesting now that I think about it, if he's the only healthy back there. I could see a big game for Baltimore.
All right. Okay. All right. That gives us some defense options. Let's go to stacks, but we're only going to talk to Phil and Devin. Just kidding. Let's go to John first to talk about stacks. John, who are your stacks this week?
I got called this week. Last week I had the winner too, and nobody came to me. So
it was in your article though. We weren't trying to keep it from anybody.
Yeah. Look, I've got a couple here. Let me see. I've got so many here that written down that I thought I may never get to talk about.
All right, you're out of time, Phil.
I think Matt Ryan to Julio we talked about already. I think running back Noah Fant. I know one of the guys talked about Noah Fant. I love that call. I think that's a really sharp call this week. I also like a huge game stack in that Las Vegas, Los Angeles Chargers game. I think you can go with Devin's Air Bear. I think you can throw in Justin Jackson, and you can also throw in a receiver there and get the bulk of the Chargers' potential points. I think they're projected to score around 26. So if you like Hunter Henry or if you like Keenan Allen, go with one of them. So you got the rushing touchdowns, and then you're taking a chance on how it's going to go with passing. And then run that back with Darren Waller, who I think is a superb play this week. You're just hoping that game's going to be 30-30 if you do that, because half your roster is going to be exposed to that game. And then I'll throw one more out. Kirk Cousins, pick your favorites. Pick your favorite Minnesota receiver. Get that leverage play away from Dalvin Cook and all the exposure he's going to see. I talked about Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, and then run it back with DeAndre Swift, who I think has a big game this week.
Nice. Phil, stacks.
John stole my stacks. This is why we don't let him give stacks.
Way to go, John.
I was pretty much just going to say the same thing, except in the LA versus Vegas game. I think that you want to work. Mike Williams looked sensational last week, and I think he could be in for some big plays. So I think you don't want to forget about him if you're playing Herbert. And also don't forget about Henry Ruggs. Don't know if you guys have heard, but he is fast and he could get downfield, and he could easily bust off a big play. So if we're talking about GPPs where we're just looking for the home run, Ruggs is your guy there, maybe as a way to turn that stack contrarian instead of playing Waller. And then don't forget about Hawkinson on that Detroit stack either. He had a season high in targets last week. Extremely skilled and potentially explosive player, who I think is only getting better as the season has gone along. And we already talked about Thielen and Jefferson, so that's it for me.
What do you think, Devin? Who are you stacking?
Off the board stack: Kyle Allen, Terry McLaurin, Darius Slayton. Darius Slayton could have had 3 really long touchdowns last game if Daniel Jones could have hit him. If he hits him on one of those, it could be a big game. And Kyle Allen threw for 280 yards and 2 touchdowns last time, and they only scored 19 points. So if there's a shootout potential in this game, I think that Allen could have a big game. Going up the board a little bit, Patrick Mahomes. Pick either Hill or Kelce, and
why not both?
Yeah, and Christian McCaffrey, and you're gonna have to just have garbage the rest of your lineup because that's really expensive. But you're gonna have to go Cephas, you're gonna have to go Justin Jackson, you're gonna have to go Amendola, Nyheim Hines maybe. But hey, I mean, if they put up 40 and McCaffrey has 12 catches, like, it could happen.
Bold.
That's a good call. There's going to be a ton of plays in that game. Both of those teams are borderline top 5 in situation neutral pace of play.
And you don't have to pay up for CMC. You can go with Robbie Anderson or DJ Moore, both of who I'm looking at my projections right now. They both come up really high. In fact, I'm looking at the numbers right now. DJ Moore has the highest value at the wide receiver position as of Wednesday night. He's definitely a good play, and you can get him for half the price of or thereabouts of CMC.
Yeah, and that way you have a little wiggle room on some of your other positions.
No, you either go stars and scrubs in that one.
Devin with the far out stack picks.
I mean, one thing you could do on the opposite side, and we haven't mentioned his name, is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He has 20 or more carries in 3 games this year. And if he gets 20 carries against this Carolina defense, he's going to have 100 yards and probably not a touchdown, but that's the problem. But you could go Helaire, you could go the Chiefs defense and just hope that they grind the game out.
The way that that backfield is splitting up the carries, it's kind of ugly. Like, I don't know that any one guy is going to get 15 carries.
They're not grinding. I mean, this team doesn't know how to grind. They just go out and score. Edwards-Helaire has, since Le'Veon's come to town, he's had 53 and 50% of the snaps. If he gets down into the $5,000 range, color me interested, but at 6,100, he's probably still too expensive.
What percent rostered would he have to be for you to be interested? If he's 5%.
I'm interested.
Okay.
At 5%, I'm interested. I've got him, as of tonight, 5.6% chance of reaching GPP value. And there's some additional math that goes into that, but that would take me up to about 12%. So if he's below 12%, I'm interested. If he's in that area, a little bit
more. If he's 5% chance to reach value, you would go up to 12%.
Because there's 2 running back positions and a flex, right? So you multiply everything by 2 depending on how you're allocating your positions. But it's between 10 to 15% in terms of how I go about that. And, I'll cut it off at 12 for simplicity. But if he's below that, then that makes him a pretty decent play in terms of, odds of getting there. But, and I think you might be right. I think he might come in lower than that because of some of the things we're talking about here. So I don't hate it. We'll see what happens.
I think he comes in 3 to 5% as we stand on Wednesday.
Then he's going to be a really sharp play for GPPs this weekend, if that holds.
Because everybody's going to be remembering the game last week where they went all pass all the time.
He's had 14 carries in his last 2 games with Le'Veon Bell coming in. Like, if you're playing 5 lineups, you're not playing Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
And we talked last week about the narrative street with Bell and the big game, and we thought that he was going to be there. And actually, Bell got less snaps last week than he did his first week on the offense. So maybe he's capped at 30%. I mean, we're not going to know, but that's why we do tournaments, right? Because you're kind of guessing at what's going to happen. And as we're talking through this, I like that play, Devin. We'll see whether or not the percent rostered numbers come in at what you think they're going to by the end of the week.
And that's part of the fun of mass multi-entering. You can sort of plan out your roster percentages. And even if you're playing in a very cheap GPP, like a quarter entry or a dollar entry, you can get the fun of sort of building a whole bunch of lineups using something like our multi-lineup optimizer that we have over at footballguys.com. So check out all of our content over there, footballguys.com/DFS. We'll be back next Friday morning with our Week 10 episode. On behalf of John Lee, Devin Knotts, and Phil Alexander, I'm Austin Lee saying thank you for watching and thanks for being a football guy. Be sure to check out all of our content over at footballguys.com/DFS by clicking the button in front of Devin's face. And if you'd like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, be sure to press the button that's on Phil's face. And if you want to see our latest video, click that giant box that's in front of John Lee's face. Check all that stuff out. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching.